Hello there.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Karen, you get to come up here with me.
I'll just stand.
This is good. Well, I appreciate you turning out and have an opportunity to ask some questions. I hope you all had a chance to watch the budget release earlier. And just a few key principles. One, less revenue means less spending. With production and price declines, we've got less revenue as a state, there'll be less spending. The budget proposes $1.1 billion less in general fund spending. It accommodates a 0.8% increase in the operating budget. That is a level of increase that has not been seen in some years. So we're slowing the rate of growth there in the operating budget. In the current budget, we left a surplus of $508 million. I met in this room with legislative leadership from both parties, majorities, minorities, kind of outlined the budget release that we have done today and took questions from them. Let them know I wanted to work with them on a spending limit for the upcoming session. Talked about our priorities for public safety, and you saw the elements of that as well as the energy pieces in the budget. And just look forward to having the budget proposal fully vetted in the public process of the legislature. And I'm here to answer more detailed questions about the budget proposal, or if I can't, then Karen Rehfeld, why don't you come stand over here? So why don't we just start with some questions. Mr. Bradner.
Governor, is there any funding for the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation in the budget?
Yes. Well, indeed, there is. Before I just tell you the amount, let me tell you the message I'm sending with the amount. I think we have some gas line work to do, and I chose not to favor one project over the other, whether the AGDC small diameter line or the AGIA reimbursement with TransCanada and the producers. And so there is $25 million proposed in the budget for AGDC and $25 million proposed for the AGIA reimbursement side of the equation to set up that discussion with legislators. Yes.
What exactly is vetting, and how are you going to vet the capital budget?
You know, that's a good question, actually, that you should ask legislators, because our capital budget proposal is on the table as of today, and certainly the bill will have the projects that we have in there that have come through our agency review. So the capital budget from our perspective is on the table, but the capital budget from the legislator's perspective and the community projects that they include, that's actually a better question, I think, for how they'll govern their processes.
This last year, you did give some reasons for the few vetoes which you made in the capital budget. But I believe the year before, when there was $500 million worth of vetoes, and the Constitution says the governor shall give a reason for his veto. There was only 3 reasons that weren't funded in a future budget. And wouldn't that be a good guide for you to send messages for the legislature that you discuss those different kinds of projects and whether you think they're acceptable for the public?
Well, actually, I think you're referring more to the vetoes from 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And those vetoes certainly were at record levels. I think I vetoed $300 million the first year, $400 million the second year. Last year, however, we had a little better working relationship and an understanding of an overall spending limit, and it was that was a much better relationship. I felt like the messages were received and understood, and beyond that.
Well, I acknowledge that. But it looked like that year before it was a wonderful opportunity to give direction, that questioning whether purely municipal functions should be funded, or why in the world we fund somebody's deferred maintenance. I don't know. They neglect their maintenance, so they come to us to pay for it. Would you plan to use that as a tool? Don't you think it would be appropriate to use it as a tool?
I think I already do that, but I can certainly improve on it. But let's move to questions on the current year budget. Rich?
Sort of on the same theme. The idea that you had these big vetoes at the start of
2
the
years ago,
and then last year you had a basic. I think you had an agreement with the legislature on spending limits. What do you see? What was their reaction when you met with them this time around in terms of spending limits?
Very positive. Particularly since, as a former Senate Finance co-chair, I really think that there are some real opportunities to do some good work for Alaskans while making a more sustainable budget over the long run. I think Karen and her team and our commissioners have provided some really elegant solutions, and most people don't think about the financial side as elegant, but I know you do as a CPA type. But I guess the question really is about how we move forward. And in these meetings that I had here in this room with legislators, they were more than willing to work in the legislative process and develop spending limits together and set priorities together. And I think we've got it off on the right foot with both majority and minority caucuses, and that's what we've started, that conversation. Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
There was some concern raised by the House Minority Leader and about the projections and whether the projections were done in a new way or whether they're unrealistic in terms of revenue. And I just wanted to comment with.
Yeah, I'll comment, and then if the commissioner has some follow-up. In years past, and this goes way back across administrations, our revenue projections, and I'm going to put it in my own layman's speak, and that is our projections of oil revenue and production has been derived from what I would call proven reserves and estimated reserves. My lingo, and I'm sure the commissioner can correct me. But we've taken 100% of that number of estimated reserves and included that in our production numbers when the companies know darn well that in their economics, they chance factor those or risk weight those, and they understand that estimated is not proved up. Those reserves are not proven. They've not been delineated. They've not been fully analyzed. And so there really has been basing a revenue forecast in years past on 100% production numbers of proven reserves and estimated reserves, that has resulted in us undershooting our production estimates. And so this year's approach has been to, we think, more accurately reflect what will come through the pipeline in the years ahead.
Tony, long term, but what about for next year?
Commissioner, can you come discuss that?
Yes, looking short term, which is what they focused on FY13 and FY14, it's really pretty clear, which is if you compare the spring forecast to the fall forecast, oil price is down, production is down, company spending that as it increases reduces the PTV and brings less into the state, that's up. And when you combine the three of those, you end up with a smaller number. So when we looked at FY13 and FY14, what we simply took is almost half of a fiscal year of actual, which is the current fiscal year, and then projections based on that, and then on to FY14. So they really are the most accurate numbers we can find. But like I said, when everything tilts down from what we saw in the spring, you're going to see less revenue.
Estimated reserve, that's generally in established fields.
Why don't you go ahead? Can you,
I mean, it's
and correct me if I'm wrong here.
Related to established, production like it.
Yes, and that's in currently producing fields. And so, as the governor talked about, looking at how we forecast long term, they have to do with what's under development. There's spending on it, but we're not seeing production, and what's under evaluation. We know it's there. They're considering spending. It's something that we should probably factor into the forecast, but it's enough in the out years that it's much more speculative than the other two. So when you look at FY13 and FY14, it's almost entirely currently producing. So we really don't have to factor in, and we don't factor in FY13 and FY14 on any of our numbers because it's simply looking well by well at the currently producing fields and working to see what we think it's going to produce.
Thank you.
Is it safe to characterize this year or your operating budget as a status quo budget?
No, I think it's actually a reduction in spending and sets us up for a more sustainable budget across time. So
It looked like most of the decrease in spending would be in the capital budget. So where are the savings on the operating budget?
money spends, whether it's operating or capital. But one of the savings in the operating budget is in the Medicaid portion. That's only increasing by, and I say only, by $17.7 million, where in years past, I want to say it's been $40 to $60 million in increases. And so that's a function of the formula for Medicaid. And that, I mean, it kind of shows you how formula programs can drive increases or decreases as well.
But as far as what Alaskans might see less of in your budget, is that it? Or are there other things that might be cut also?
Again, the largest portion is from capital spending. There's no question. The other portion is Medicaid at this point.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
It's not really a cut though, Medicaid, it's still an increase.
It is an increase.
It's still an
Correct.
increase.
Correct. But what we're referring to is that the rate of growth in the operating budget at 0.8%, we haven't seen that in recent years. It's been, our proposals have been in the 4 and 5% increase just because of the formula increases in large measure.
So when you speak of a reduction in spending, you're combining capital and operating.
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
Are you attempting to change any of the coverage under Medicaid?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
No.
And are there barriers to doing that once you've established functions that you're including in relation to federal funds, that it's difficult to drop some of those?
Well, you've kind of identified the barrier, and that's a separate topic, except that it's the current Medicaid formula is funded in this budget. You're referring to Medicaid expansion provisions under the Affordable Care Act, I think. Or reductions. Well, we have seen some reductions in the prescription drug program and portion of Medicaid due to some cost containment measures that have been taken.
I guess what I'm getting at, not all states fund all the same things under Medicaid that we do.
Correct.
But once we did that, we can't get back. Is that true? Or not?
That's basically true with the maintenance of effort provisions under federal law. Yeah. But
That's
okay,
fine.
let's go online.
Operator, could you take us off lecture mode, please? We're ready for online Q&A.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1. Sean, go ahead with your question.
This is Shauna Crondall, is that who you're asking?
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, yes, my question is, FY2014 will be the 4th fiscal year in a row with no increase to the BSA. And I'm wondering, is the state going to give school districts ideas on where they are more efficient in order to meet the needs of students with no increase in the BSA?
Actually, that's a false assumption you've made. It's true that there has been no increase in the base student allocation of the formula, but it's not true that we have not increased education funding across that time. This budget, just on the K-12 formula side, in the formula itself, increases it by $13 million. In addition, there's a $25 million boost. I call it for energy costs because we can point to those increasing energy costs that are now funded in this budget. But to a school district, money spends, whether it's for energy costs or anything else, that increase is equivalent to a $100 BSA increase. So to say that there's no BSA increase, you're technically correct, but when it comes to the dollars being spent, I don't think that's accurate.
Go ahead, operator.
Bob, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Hello, Governor Bob Scott for the Legislative Digest and Laws for the Sea newsletter. Your budget documents present your Chinook spending proposals as a 10-year plan overall. How much of that is in the FY budget proposal, and how much of that is new projects that haven't been proposed either by Department of Fish and Game or by the legislature in past years?
So the Chinook Salmon Research Initiative, the additional funding on top of what's already being spent is an additional $10 million as part of our capital budget spending. That goes to both in-river and marine environments. And that's
how much of that is for FY2014?
That's the FY2014 $10 million appropriation. So you'll see us come back in succeeding years for the additional monies. I believe that's on top of $14 million worth of Chinook salmon research we already have in the base budget.
So, Governor, it's and just to be clear, it's a $30 million initiative over a 5-year period. So I think that might have been specific to his question.
Thanks. Did you get that, Bob?
Katie, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. This is Katie Quinn, KSRN News, and here we're curious about funding for infrastructure, particularly the Sterling and Seward Highway corridors. Are they included?
I believe they are through the federal match that the state has provided. In our transportation budget, we have $147 million of state funding to match about $948 million or so of federal funding. There's over $1 billion going towards transportation, aviation, marine work. We can check for you to see whether there is a specific Sterling Highway component for you.
Matt, go ahead with your question.
Thanks, Governor. It's Matt Buxton at the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. I saw that there's no funding for air quality mitigation for the Fairbanks North Star Borough. With the recent election, I mean, what's your vision for how the state will handle bringing the borough into attainment with the EPA deadlines? Is there a possibility of pushback against the feds, or what do you see?
Well, Matt, first, I don't think you've given us enough credit. I think we just put $355 million worth of value on the table between loans and a $50 million grant for a natural gas solution in the interior. In addition, DEC is working daily on solutions and implementing solutions in that particular area. Karen, do you have any additional information for Matt on that?
Governor, there were some prior appropriations that the borough still has access to for their wood stove conversion program and also their air quality mitigation. So there are funds still remaining that they're going to continue to utilize for the project.
Do you know about how much, roughly?
The wood stove conversion, I believe, was about $4 million, and the air quality was $2.5 million.
Go ahead, operator.
Tom, go ahead with your question.
Hi, yes. Tom Hewitt, News 13 in Fairbanks. What's the state of funding for the University of Alaska? And you mentioned that $10 million in funding for studying king salmon decline. Will that work involve university researchers?
Karen, can you speak to university funding in general? And then
Certainly.
king salmon.
Thank you. For the University of Alaska's budget, we are including for them their increased costs for their negotiated agreements with their teacher and other employees there. We've also included some increased costs for operating and maintaining the new life sciences building at the University of Alaska. In our deferred maintenance program, we've had about $37.5 million for the university annually. This will be our fourth year. So we're continuing that effort. On the Chinook salmon research, I believe that the University of Alaska is very much engaged in the work that the Department of Fish and Game is doing, and I'm fairly certain that there will be some participation between the university in that effort.
Thanks.
Mark, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, hi, Governor. It's Mark Miller calling from the Juneau Empire. I was just curious about funding for Juneau office buildings, as well as the capital repair situation.
So on the office space, what I've asked our departments to do is to gain efficiencies in existing space, and we have an initiative that will phase in new office space system whereby, for example, we can reduce our footprint or reduce our costs over time if instead of having single offices on the outer windows, we implement this new technology that allows us to have a few inner offices with more outer offices. Bottom line is it's a phased implementation over time that Department of Administration has worked on diligently and has an implementation schedule for our departments. When it comes to, there is money in the budget, additional money in the budget for the State Library and Museum building in Juneau. And I don't have, and Douglas, so talk about Douglas Island as well.
Thank you, Governor. There's just under $10 million to complete the work and the renovation of the Douglas Island facility where Fish and Game and Corrections are located. And we also have a couple of $1 million in for repairs to the parking garage, the state office building parking garage at the existing facility. And but the renovations to Douglas Island was determined that that was a much more cost-effective approach to dealing with some of our space needs in Juneau versus a new building.
Shauna, go ahead with your question.
Yes, I just had a follow-up question to my question on the BSA increase. I understand there have been other increases that weren't through the BSA, but school districts are still having to cut positions. There was going to be a legislative funding study that did not occur. And so I'm wondering, is the state administration going to be involved in funding study and or helping school districts find ways to be more efficient?
I don't have an answer on the funding study. Do you, Karen, know any? We don't have any information on that. I can tell you that I know that there was an article recently in the Anchorage Daily News about, certainly 100 positions being cut. I understand, too, from the article that there was no live teachers cut as a result of that 100 position change. So those are vacant positions being cut, and through retirements, that is being managed. That's no teachers being laid off as a result of those cuts. But certainly, we're open to discussion within a reasonable spending limit on costs that are being borne by school districts, and having the discussion about what should be borne by local government and what should be borne by the state.
Operator, we'll take one more call online.
There's no more in queue, ma'am.
Rich.
Governor, any connection between proposed oil tax production cuts and this budget at this point?
This budget reflects the current state of production decline.
Okay.
And it also reflects about $400 million in tax credits that are expected to be paid out under the existing regime.
All existing structure.
It assumes existing structure right now. Yeah. Mr. Bradner.
Governor, on the Mike Bradner, Legislative Digest, on the BSA, about the time you left the legislature, I think the year after, Senate Bill 174 came in, late hour amendment, and it allowed property in high growth districts to be added at 50% of value. And that resulted in the erosion. Statute still read 4 mills, but the erosion of the mill level. And in a late hour amendment last session, there was a fix, 2.65, because that's the amount that Matsu and Anchorage had declined to. And there's rumbles, because that was highly beneficiary of those districts, that they might make a run at restoring the 50% value. What is your feeling? I assume that amendment somehow came with your approval, but would you oppose any effort to go back to the old system?
I'm not prepared to comment on that because I have not even looked at that issue for months at this point, and so in the context of this budget release, I'm not prepared to make a comment on that. So.
Karen, you're an old.
Yeah, but we're not gonna go speculating about what might happen in the legislative session right now. So, who else? Yeah.
In your remarks to the chamber, you briefly touched on North Slope LNG. I don't think you attached any numbers to it. Can you on those a little bit?
Yeah, that was the Interior Energy package that we released about a week and a half ago. So there is $150 million of participation bonds, so low interest financing that would come through ADA. They have a solicitation of interest on the street now for a liquefaction facility that asking private companies if they want to make use of the $150 million of low interest financing. In addition, this budget capitalizes the SETS fund. It was that Sustainable Energy Transmission System Fund, which again are loans for energy projects. You'll remember last year the legislature capitalized that fund with $125 million. This budget adds another $125 million, so it effectively shifts from one savings account to another, capitalizes that fund at $250, and it says we'll take the $150 in participation bonds, we'll add the $125 from the SETS financing mechanism. We'll add $50 million in general fund grants, which are in the budget, and gas storage tax credits. That package, that's the $355 million worth of value that I referred to with Matt Buxton of the News Miner. That $355 million worth of value has been put on the table for companies and the city and borough entity to figure out together how to move LNG by truck to Fairbanks and frankly provide that springboard to provide natural gas to other communities throughout the state. So it's a package that's involved, and it's going to require legislation, multiple pieces of legislation to complete that package. Rich.
Wisconsin governor and legislature asserted that their changes in collective bargaining statutes help their economy. Michigan said the same thing with right-to-work legislation. Would you support any change in either collective bargaining, right-to-work status in Alaska?
That's certainly outside the scope of our budget release, but I can tell you that one of the key elements of this budget that will have to be added, and we have historically done that, is add the collective bargaining agreements that are reached. I don't have any plans to pursue the type of legislation that you're speaking to, nor am I prepared to comment on a piece of legislation that I haven't seen. So. Anybody else? Because I'm going to have to wrap up and get out before the weather gets me in.
Could you break down where you hope the Lux resources money will go?
I can. Actually, Karen, you might do a better job of that. Were you at the speech, because I did some of that.
Ambler's $8.5 million.
Ambler's $8.5 million.
$2 million DOT.
$2 million for DOT.
Quarters, and then Dalton Highway at 7.
And Dalton Highway at 7.
I'm sorry, how much for Ambler?
8.5. 8.5.
And the others for?
Dalton Highway at 7. Ambler, and then DOT has $2 million in to identify and establish new corridors for timber and mining resources.
How did you accomplish the Medicaid reduction increase? I guess we could say.
The low-level increase?
Yes. What's the cause of that?
I think.
Prescriptions, you said.
Well, that's one, but it's all about the eligibility numbers, flatlining, costs being reduced a little bit, and utilization is down too.
So it's just based on their projections.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to have to run. Thank you so much. Thanks.